Good evening, and welcome to the show. This is the First Amendment, historically speaking, and I will be your host. My name is Frederick Douglass Dixon. Thank you for joining us. As always, I have to thank UPTV for allowing us this small time that we have to, what we would like to say, add to the body of knowledge with a thought and a lens that is normally not taken as scholarly or not taken seriously. So I'd like to thank the UPTV staff always and all the laborers for all the help that they give and all the extra work that they do to make this place run as efficiently as possible. And this particular show being a part of it. I'd like to thank Daniel as well. He's always such a great help. So I thank everyone. And I'd like to thank those of you all who are watching. It has been quite some time since I've started here, and all I can say is I thank each and every one of you all who's ever paid any attention to this show. We appreciate you being as kind as you are. So today I want to go straight into our subject, and our subject is, again, current events. What's going on in the media? What's going on today in Baltimore? Now, we've had about 18, maybe even 19 shows, something very close to that. And on about 5 or 6 occasions, we've had to literally stop our historical timeline or our historical content to talk about the current events, which is very well is that we want to do these things. So this show should not be limited to just a historic view, but every time that we have stopped the historical content, it has been because of some tragic event or something that we can't get past discussing. Again, here we are speaking about the ongoings in Baltimore, Maryland, and the things that transpired. And the young man's name is Freddie Gray. And he was somehow, and I'm sure that most of you have heard about this, somehow in police custody, and somehow his windpipe is crushed, and somehow he is no longer living. We've heard varied stories about what happened, what took place while he was in custody. We've even had some what they call people who were on the scene to give points about the actual what transpired. I find it very alarming to continue to, in 2015, go week after week, and in my mind, I'm saying, what's next? Now, I've been at this long enough to say that, and I think that I've said it on occasions during some of the productions that we've given you, that we would be talking about these issues again. We will be talking about the literal murder of an unarmed black man at the hands of those who are authorities, those who are paid to keep, what they say, law and order, the criminal justice system. Some say it's just us, meaning black folks have grabbed that term and coined it. Well, the criminal justice system, whether it be just us or not, it is indeed criminal. And today, if we are very critical about the thought of another young man being murdered, well, his death, we call that justifiable homicide. In 2007, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan gave a very stirring lecture on this particular piece. And what he said in 2007 is coming to pass. So indeed, he is tied with his vision. He's very much so tied into what will happen in the future. And he said this practically years and years and years ago, practically 10 years ago, that the murders of black men would increase. And as we look today, we can talk about Trayvon Martin. We can talk about just some of the latest victims of this mayhem and murder. And it scares me to the point that I understand that as a black man in America, we don't understand the consequences of how our children are internalizing these behaviors and how they are dealing with these calamities. And what you see now is the rioting that takes place. Well, folks, we're quick to say, well, you shouldn't riot in your own community. You shouldn't tear up your own neighborhood. Well, as one who's raised, reared, and found a lot of questions and answers in an impoverished community, and if anybody understands where Chicago is, and the south side of Chicago, more specifically 79th and Halsted, which is indeed itself a place that has for years been the scene of murder and mayhem, then we understand fully that every city seems to have some thematic connections. The homelessness, the haplessness, the things that are going on with poverty, the things that are going on with the access to education. Then we understand that those in those communities feel hopeless. Why do they feel hopeless? And why do they tear or destroy their own neighborhood? Well, they're not vested in that neighborhood. And for the most part, those who profit greatly from that particular neighborhood don't look like those who live in that neighborhood. So I was raised as a very young man on that particular corner where there were several different ethnic groups who were vested financially in the community. So Frank's, that was a department store that was over 50 years old, was controlled by a Jewish man. And now we have those who are Arab who live in the community. And as a Muslim man, I find it very hard to speak to that community as my brother and my sisters when they have for years forwarded the most forbidding items to be sold in the black community that cause death and destruction. So when you say that, why would they tear their own neighborhood up? Well, they don't own the stores. They don't own the businesses. So there are indeed people who are traducers and interlopers of the black community right there on a daily basis, as if it's business as usual, par for the course, or somewhat normality. All of these things tie into why you would see a group of people rebel in their own neighborhood, riot in their own neighborhood, find a means to exercise their thoughts. So Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois said in 1903, in his work, The Occasional Papers, he said, "What after all am I?" Now, this was groundbreaking in 1903. Am I American or am I a Negro? So today we can be a bit more contemporary and use the word black. Can I be both? And then we ask the question, what after all are black Americans today in American society? Are they the captive and unlawful prey of others? Are they indeed expendable? Well, that's rhetorical, yes. Black lives, as they say, do matter, but matter to whom? And for what reason? Now, we can go back historically to 1890 and talk about what we know to be the Negro Question. The Negro Question was what was discussed at the Mohonk Conference 1 and 2. In 1890, the Mohonk Conference, but the Negro Question in Usler, New York, the Mohonk Conference, excuse me. The Negro Question reads, what should be done with the presence of the troublesome Negro for maximum exploitation? Now, if we digest that question and unpack it, then it will be, for me, quite obvious today when we say, what should be done with the presence of the troublesome Negro for maximum exploitation? Well, they're no longer needed to be slaves, physical slaves, to be hewers of wood and drawers of water. So now, indeed, the Negro or the black population is indeed expendable. And what we find consistently are the signs and the vestiges of that same thought. So when you have a group of people who are considered to be subhuman, then it's a little easier to extinguish or eliminate that group legally and systematically. And yes, we know Black Lives Matter. But the question is, how much do they matter? And are these answers being played out in front of us consistently so that we don't have to question the militarization of the equipment of the police? Of course, those policemen in Baltimore seem to have shown restraint in a time of chaos, which is a portion of their training. But what I say, without any question, is how do we look to those same men who literally snuffed out this young man's life? How do we look to them as humans? Or how do we look through their lens to become more critical at how they look at the ability to murder this particular young man, Freddie Gray? Now, to dig into his past is very critical. But to make him a victim at this point, make him anything other than a victim at this point, is the media and those who control media and those who will benefit greatly from his demise. And they're doing it every time you turn on CNN, every time you turn on MSNBC. That same group is prospering greatly from this tragic event. So what do we tell the youngs of ours? Well, I say without question that you have to be able to point to these things. A very wise man explained to me that when you have questions about what to do next, about how to research, about how to look at history, then you should use evidence as the empirical portion of answering that question. So the evidence shows us Trayvon Martin. The evidence shows us Mike Brown, Eric Garner, and now Freddie Gray, Sean Bell. We're talking about people in the last 10 years. The evidence proves that without question, Black lives are endangered. And we are an endangered species and no longer looked to as a viable portion of the society, at least in the labor market, no longer needed. So what should be done with the presence of the troublesome Negro for maximum exploitation? Well, now, today, we can answer that in a very solid manner by saying genocide. Yes, this is very serious. And how our young internalize it, how they become callous to watching week after week another person being executed, another person that is unarmed, another person that will perhaps receive no justice through the criminal justice system. And then how our young begin to look at those of us who are of age, in power, and quite capable of making a change. Yes, they become very disdainful. They have a heart that becomes heavy. And then they look to you for answers. And we are not being sufficient in providing these answers as adults. Our mindset seems to be about hoarding material culture. And what do we say? Right now, today, we say, well, for the most part, I'm a good person. I do good things for my community. I do good things for my family. I do good things because I'm a good person. I look at our situation today and say, yes, we have lots of good people. Black, brown, yellow, white. We have all kinds of good people. But the question that I pose to you is good for what? What are you good for as a black man who can explain to another black man at this point in history, why are you angry? What makes you an angry black man? What makes you an angry black woman? What makes you an angry black child? What makes you an angry black individual, an angry black citizen? Well, it's quite clear on a regular basis that these lives have and continue to dwindle in importance. And if you're not upset about this, and if you're not angry about this, then what is it that you see fit to have anger about? What is it that you tell the youth about your turn as an adult with sound mind and body, and you have nerve to run, tuck your tail, and say absolutely nothing for your position, for your salary, and for your love of your open enemy? Indeed, we are the perpetrators in some rights of our own crimes. Where are the stand-up young black men that are being cultivated to not accept this? They're right in Baltimore. They're right in Baltimore right now. And thank God for their fierce fortitude that they have forwarded to the world. Yes, they are rebels, and yes, they're a tad bit confused, but they are rebels with a cause. And that cause is to answer what we did not provide for them as a generation. Frederick Douglass said it well. He said, we want rain without thunder and lightning. He said, for if the task was light, the lame would leap like a rabbit and the dumb would speak eloquently. Very, very wise man. And when I look to America, how do you justify consistently without your hypocrisy being exposed? I understand wholeheartedly that America is in crisis. America is doomed, and we are continuously seeing the vestiges of what has happened before, looking at the present to be able to navigate and give explicit understanding to what will happen in the near future. How do we look at it? How would you look at it as one who is under the gun consistently? We understand fully that all it takes is a bad experience, a bad encounter with a police officer, with a group of policemen, and your life is indeed at jeopardy. So the chance of living goes down when you are in those encounters. Go back to what the wise man said. Use the evidence. Use the evidence. Look no further than what has happened. Now, there are a lot of social atmosphere, connections, and aspects that render these particular situations. How is the black man deemed today? How is the black woman deemed today? Who is the most incarcerated population? It is indeed time for us to talk very seriously about solutions. Because America, your time of rule is being is questioned across the globe. And because of our media control, the masses of Americans don't get another story. And when you do, you look to perhaps the BBC or maybe Al Jazeera, as they used to have some sort of standing in the community. And we're looking at it through a very tinted and tainted angle. It's about America, and it's about America the Great. How do we look today at America and the ongoings of just recently? What do you think about those young people in Baltimore? Well, they're telling you they no longer want to be compliant. They no longer want to be a part of the major organizations and the major systems of this country because it has failed them. They haven't told you that it's failed them, but you're watching it in their actions. Because education in itself should civilize where those things are not an option. If we understand the seriousness of what they're saying, this young group is not like any group that we've produced before. And the group that's coming behind them will be that much more serious. Only a small group will find that education is the answer. Only a small group will continue to look to their church and their pastors for the answers that they seek, because they've been failed. And they've been failed miserably by adults who have taken advantage, for lack of a stronger term, of their youth, of their willingness to listen, and now you see the defiance. So indeed, you are a rebel, and you need to understand that you're a rebel and you do have a cause. But what you really have to understand as a rebel with a cause is who's your open enemy. You don't have to go much further than the generation that raised you, than the generation who has patronized you, who is the generation who has spoken to you so very ill and spoken about you in such a manner that it disgusts you, and now the conversation and the ability to communicate has been eliminated. So when we look at those young folks in Baltimore, understand that they're a clear reminder of what generations before them could have and perhaps should have done, and leaving them very limited options to move along. So indeed, I do not advocate any sort of violence, but I do understand when the downtrodden have had enough. I do understand severely how one can be pushed into a corner and forced to come out swinging. I do understand wholeheartedly what it is that they feel that they've missed, that they have not had any access to. It's very proper to act in a manner other than civil when you're treated other than civil. So how, today, do we look to raising our children? Now, I'm very serious about how we raise our women, because that is our most precious population. But watch our women, how they have supported over the years, and such a great support system, how that is dissipating from generation to generation. How those young men feel as though when you're raised by a woman, you take the same characteristics in some regards. So these men, you're under a lot of pressure, more pressure than ever before. And if we, as a group, don't forward to our young people an alternative for how they reacted in Baltimore, you're going to see it again, because I have no question that before very long, the name Eric Gardner, the name Mike Brown, the name Trayvon Martin, the name Freddie Gray, the name Sean Bell will be replaced with a new name. And they'll have very similar characteristics on how they met their demise, and by the same group. So we will be looking in the near future. I'm willing to bet, not a gambling man, but I'm willing to wager that before the summer is out, there will be a name that replaces those names. There'll be a more up-to-date Trayvon Martin. There'll be a far more contemporary Freddie Gray. And we will see the same reaction. So I am indeed not encouraging violence, but I am encouraging that you stand up like men and women, that you have the fortitude of the soldiers that will enlist whatever means appropriate to make sure that you are dealt with in a fair manner. And then it's very hard to receive fair treatment from a group of people who continuously forward to you that your existence is no longer, or never has been, looked to as pleasant, and just by you being here is disquieting. How do you take a slave and make them a human after you made a human a slave? So how does the hypocrite become a believer? It's very hard to mix the slave and the slave master and call themselves equal. Well, Frederick Douglass said something else very wise. It is vain that we speak of men being men without doing the work of men. So for whatever reason, you tend to want to sit on your hands. You tend to not want to speak in a manner that will force our young generation to be accountable to those who are their open enemies. It's easier to befriend. It's easier to look for just a small position within the structure of white superiority and what role that our professionals play. It is indeed easier to go along to get along. And it pays far more lucrative wages in America than to stand and say, this is the part that I will no longer be the particular linchpin. How can you explain to our youth without justifying some element of what they've gone through? Well, that's just how it is. No, that's how it was. And that's what they're telling you. And the hate that they have for you is multiplying and festering. And why do I speak these words so very candidly and clearly? Because we have work to do, and we are in a transitionary period where we can actually make our young people understand their worth. We can also look to them as taking over without the correct guidance, which will cause another scene that happened in Baltimore. Yes, I looked at what was going on in Baltimore, and it brought tears to my eyes. More than one way. I saw their fortitude. I saw their pushback. I saw their ability not to give up. And then I said to myself, what would have happened with that energy if it was focused in the right areas? What would have happened with that energy if we had trained that group to understand their worth? We got a lot of work to do. Sounds very cliche-ish, but the young folks are going to do it. And they're going to train the next generation to be as serious as they are. So we have to come outside of our homes, our churches, our schools, and you have to be smarter than the average to understand what you say on Facebook and what you say that's very smart in your tweets has absolutely nothing to do with what's going on in the streets. Now, this information is very serious, and we take it very serious. So to our young people, be very careful as you trot the path, but be as serious as you are. Please seek out that advice from those who won't buckle, and stay away from that boot-licking, cotton-picking, Uncle Tom thought. Indeed, you are very valuable, and indeed, we do love you. Ladies and gentlemen, this information may in no means change your mind, but because truth in you are so very valuable to me, I just thought you ought to know. I remain, with esteem and respect, Frederick Douglass Dixon, a distinguished man of color. Thank you.